G'day ladies and gentlemen, ScottyD here from the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome into the next installment in our Competitive Focus series. Alrighty everyone, welcome into the next installment in our Competitive Focus series here on the ATWN, where we jump into looking at some of the aspects of playing Warhammer 40,000 in a competitive fashion. And for today's video, I'm going to be discussing a topic that's kind of been hotly debated for quite some time in the Warhammer 40,000 competitive community and the community at large in general as well with the new edition of the game, which is, why is what you see is what you get important? Now, we're going to jump into a couple of different perspectives on that exact question in a little bit. Before we do, I want to thank everyone who has been joining us here on the ATWN on YouTube as of late. Those have been viewing our videos, liking, commenting, and subscribing on the channel. Really do appreciate all of your interaction and engagement with us. And we really hope that you are enjoying the content we are creating here on the ATWN. So let's jump into today's topic. So when it comes to what you see is what you get, there's a lot of different perspectives and aspects that come to it. Now, I'm going to be exploring the question of why is it so important from the viewpoint as both as a competitive player as well as a tournament organizer, discussing the topic and any potential implications of what you may face deciding for yourself as a player how to navigate this aspect within the hobby. But before we jump into exactly what it is, I kind of want to just preface this by saying I'm not adding to any arguments or anything that is going on within the community right now. I'm just wanting to explore the topic and kind of shed some light on what the potential implications are and such as well, rather than saying one way is right, one way is wrong. So I just want to kind of share both sides of the story within this video. So to start off with, I guess it's going to be beneficial to define what I actually mean by what you see is what you get, often expressed in the acronym as we commonly say is WYSIWYG. Now, the premise of WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, is that when you look at any units of miniatures on the table, you can actually see what war gear that they are physically equipped with, as well as the base sizes that they should be on, from Games Workshop stating the base size that they should be on, because that's the base size they come with in their actual kits. So why is this so important in Warhammer 40,000 and in particular the competitive setting? Now, there are quite a number of reasons why what you see is what you get is important for the game, as all of which boil down to one singular core issue, which is providing clarity on the tabletop, is the best way I can kind of summarize it. So I think it's a reasonable expectation for players and tournament organizers to be able to look at a unit or look at the tabletop and be able to identify what unit is what, either through the look of the unit or by the weapons that they are equipped with. Now, this allows you as a player to assess the board state by having this information by just looking at the table, and does save you some time by not needing to ask your opponent what units are what on the table. So how do players maybe bypass or work within kind of some of the gray areas that you could say around what you see is what you get in the competitive scene? Now, the most common two ways that people do this is either through the use of Counts As or proxy miniatures to stand in place for the official Games Workshop produced model. Now, to define both of these, a Counts As model is defined as using a different unit from the same or another army's miniature line to represent a unit that you don't necessarily have the models for, and so you're using a different unit's miniatures to represent them on the tabletop in your games. Whereas proxies are generally defined as non-Warhammer 40k miniatures, where they are from maybe another miniature range within Games Workshop. They might be from another miniature manufacturer entirely. They might be 3D printed alternate prints, or they could also be IP infringing 3D prints on Games Workshop or other miniature games products. Now, almost all tournaments that I know of have a process that they have put in place for allowing these type of models to be used at events, which is very fair because, you know, Warhammer is an expensive hobby, and sometimes you don't necessarily want to shell out a ridiculous amount of money for just 5 models in a particular army that you're just, maybe you're shoehorning in something, or you're not wanting to pay 60 odd bucks for a Calidus assassin, for example. So that's something that where the tournaments have that process to enable that flexibility for players to bring different models, because majority of the time, a lot of events aren't actually GW official events. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, in general, this process is going to be taking photos of the models, that you are wanting to use in question with a photo of the unit that you're wanting to represent. Maybe it's just a stock image off Games Workshop's website, and sending that to the tournament organizers going, hey, can I use X models to represent this unit in my army, detailing the models and making sure that they've got all the information they need to know to make a proper judgment call on whether they're okay to use or not for a tournament. Now, the reasons why they may allow them or not will differ from event to event, so be prepared for that if you are using Counts As or proxies. So there are some issues that do arise with using Counts As proxies that I can personally see. Now, for Counts As miniatures, their issue is that you could mistake them for their original unit instead of the unit that they are being used as in the game from an army's model range. Again, can lead to confusion when it comes to making tactical decisions. During your game, you have to use your time to ask your opponent, especially if they are models from the same army range and a same potential unit you can legally take within that army. And so you could confuse it for their actual modeled unit instead of the unit they're counting as. It could lead to confusion where the first unit you're thinking is the Counts As unit when really it's another unit somewhere else on the table. So, that leads to some confusion there, which is, something you want to potentially avoid for your opponents. And, if you're running events as well, something to bear in mind. As for proxies, there can be more issues than Counts As miniatures with proxies, in my personal opinion. They can often be of different scales if the miniatures are from a different manufacturer. And they might also not be on the same base size if you are using a different manufacturer's miniatures and using the bases that they come with, instead of making sure, because as a player, you can full well grab different miniature manufacturers' models and put them on proper size bases to represent that unit, making sure that that unit's full in scale and everything. That's awesome. But if you're just using the bases that those miniatures come with, instead of making sure they're on the right bases, that could be a potential issue. Now, these alternative models might not have the most accurate war gear listed on them for representing the unit that they are, particularly like if they've got different weapon options like special weapons, heavy weapons, different melee weapon options and things like that as well. So you need to make sure that if you are using alternative models to proxy, you need to make sure that you make that effort, if you're doing so, to have a special weapon of some kind if you are taking a special weapon in that unit, the heavy weapon, etc., so that you can differentiate what models have actually got what within the unit. They don't necessarily have to look like the actual special weapons per se, but they look like a special weapon in the unit representing something else within reason. Now, the worst case scenario you could potentially face with the proxy model is that it could lead to unintentional modeling for advantage. Now, what modeling for advantage is exactly as it sounds, is using a model that you gain some advantage in some way instead of using the actual model. Maybe it's the height, maybe it's the size of the model, the profile, things like that might be completely unintentional. Now, again, could be the wrong base size as well if you've just put them on the manufacturer's base instead of making sure they're on 32 mils or 25 mils for the game to match the base sizes of the GW models, or making sure the profile's roughly the same as the Games Workshop miniatures as well. So those are kind of the potential issues you can face when using Counts As proxies. And it kind of outlines why what you see is what you get is important in the competitive level of Warhammer 40k. Now, I will preface that by saying I have played against people with using proxies. I have no personal problem with people using Counts As or proxy units. That's perfectly fine as long as you're stating that ahead of time. Tom, who I played in a War Games highlight, he used Dalak gangers from Necromunda to count as mandrakes because the new mandrake kit wasn't out yet, and so it was like, I've converted these up. Mandrakes are pretty straightforward as a unit, so I'm like, they don't look like anything else in the army. They're very distinct. They're on the right base size. I'm like, yep, perfect. They're fine. That's not a problem at all. Even as a TO, if I was to make a judgment on those kind of proxies, I would still say, yeah, those are fine in my personal opinion. They're on the right base size. They're about the right profile. Not a drama at all. So why is it important for WYSIWYG in the competitive level of the game? Players want to be able to look across the table at your opponent's army and know what units their opponents are fielding, as well as what they're roughly equipped with, just by looking at them. Because you need to look at them to see what they've got, because then you can make the right tactical judgment calls on the table for your army when you're playing the game. You also need to have the appropriate war gear, as we've said, for their use in the game so that you're able to know what model has what gear, as well as when you're removing models as well. That's a lot more important, particularly say like a unit of infiltrators, for example. They can take a Helix Gauntlet and a comms array. As long as you can identify which two models have got the comms array and the Helix Gauntlet, you take those models off, then the unit loses that ability or those benefits. So whereas if you take off different models before them, it's like, okay, cool, they're still in place, and make sure you identify that clearly within the unit is quite important. So personally, as a player and a TO, I see WYSIWYG as a very important part of the competitive experience when playing Warhammer 40,000, and it does need to be considered with how all players handle utilizing Counts As and proxies in place of original units when you are playing your competitive games. Now, I'll say again, not trying to add any flames to the fire for this topic, but just wanted to discuss the potential issues of why what you see is what you get is an important thing to be considerate of in the competitive level of the game when you are wanting to use Counts As and proxy models, particularly in consideration for your fellow player in being a great opponent for your fellow tournament attendees that you may play against, as well as, you know, being considerate of your TOs as well. Now, I'm sure a lot of you will have a lot of thoughts and opinions of your own related to this topic that we didn't necessarily cover in the video from my personal perspective. But again, feel free to leave it down in the comments, and I'm happy to discuss those issues or those opinions that you might have around WYSIWYG and Counts As and proxy units as well, because I think it's an important discussion that we need to have in a very civil way. And so I have no problem having that discussion down in the comments below here on YouTube. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, well, that is going to be it for this installment in our competitive focus series on the ATW1. I hope that you did enjoy this rough discussion around what you see is what you get, Counts As and proxies when it comes to Warhammer 40k competitively, and kind of the implications of not following it or using Counts As and proxies, and what you should be considerate of if you are seeking to do up conversions or using alternative models for various units in your army as well. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to hit it with a like. If you have any comments, as I've said, feel free to leave them down below. Happy to continue the discussion further there as well. If you do want to catch more content here from us here at the network, feel free to hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so you're notified as to when we are releasing more content here on the network. And if you want to continue this conversation in more of a lifestyle format with myself, feel free to head over to our Twitch channel at Australis TWN, where I do hobbying streams, we do tournament coverage and tournament previews and such as well throughout the week. And I want to give a massive shout out and thanks to all of our supporters, both on Twitch and Ko-Fi. Your financial contributions really do help us to be able to continue to create the content that we are creating, as well as attending tournaments and providing more tournament coverage across the Australian Warhammer 40k competitive scene. But ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.